Hello, everybody. Welcome to the training, learning, and development community. Thanks for joining us today. We're starting a new series, kind of specific to this month, maybe after this month and after the event we have coming up. We'll continue with this one, but we're sort of building a group of testimonials, calling them success stories, teacher to trainer. And today our guest is Devin Torres. We're talking about basically going from teaching to training, but I do think this applies to any career that is interested in moving into L&D. And specifically, we're going to be kind of promoting the event that we're premiering the week of August 29, which is called Transitioning to Learning and Development. I call it T2LD for short. You can go to T2LD.com if you want to get more information about it. We've already got most of the speaker slots filled. It's looking great so far. We'll probably have the rest of it completed within the next week or two. But if you're somebody that is looking to transition into learning development from another industry or space, it'll be a great event to learn more about what it takes to be an L&D professional. And so with that, here is Devin Torres, who has actually made that switch from actually being a teacher or higher ed or academia? Like, tell us a little bit about your story.
Of course. And thank you for having me on. I made the transition to instructional design from higher ed. I had a regular full-time position, and I also was adjunct faculty. So I was in the classroom there. I also came from K-12. I used to be an ABA, and we've learned a lot about that practice, and it wasn't something that worked for me anymore. So I actually transitioned K-12 to higher ed. And I started out in data analysis, institutional research, and I actually worked for a underrepresented student program. And so I did all the data for that. And I really missed working with students because I love the collegiate experience. I like the higher ed, but I really missed kind of being in front of students and getting to know them. You're going to hear my cat in the background. I apologize in advance. In that role, I had a really great boss. His name is FJ, and he let me teach a course in our summer bridge program for those underrepresented students. And I think the first course I taught was communications. I taught it in a group with a couple of my other coworkers, and it was different than K-12. It was different having an actual class and having a rubric and having to grade. And I was like, okay, I could get used to this. I like this age group. I like the flow of this. I like the flexibility. And so throughout my time at the college, no matter what 9-to-5 role I was in, I was always kind of adjunct in some capacity, whether it be career education. I taught a course around teachers of tomorrow, so incoming first years who wanted to do our MAT program and go into education. We taught some career guidance for that. So that's kind of my teaching experience, classroom experience.
I'm really interested in the whole underrepresented student thing. Can you just tell me a little bit about that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked at a PWI, small institution, rural area, middle of nowhere kind of. And we had a program that was to help underrepresented students, so first gen, rural area, low income, minority students transition to college. I myself was a first gen student, and when I went to college, I didn't really have that support. It was like, hey, here's student loans, sign up for them, figure it out.
Yeah.
So this institution had a program that it started with a summer bridge where you come to campus like 2-3 weeks early for a 2-week period. You get to know your peers, you build a support network as an underrepresented student. And then you enter college a little bit more prepared. You have people around you who are kind of going through the same thing. And then they did programming throughout the year, which about financial literacy, identity, imposter syndrome, all of these things that typically were affecting students who were underrepresented. And it was kind of like a nice cohort building exercise. And, you're with these people for 4 years. And then as you move up in the program, you can become a mentor. And then you're working with new, first year students. So it's a really good program. It's shifted a little bit. But when I started, I love doing the data for the program and getting that feedback and stuff. But what was really impactful was like meeting those students and seeing those connections and getting to be a part of that like programmatic planning.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually a part of a program like that in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I mean, it was kind of a thing where I had like extra coaches and guides to help me through, and I get thrown together with a bunch of other students that I wasn't quite sure why I was there with them, but I was, they just, my dad was a migrant worker. And so I was like, put together with them, and I was given more guidance, and it was helpful. I made some interesting friends too. That was really, really cool. And we used to tour colleges and stuff. So that's awesome that you did that, because it really is really, really helpful. So yeah, nice.
Out of all the roles I had there, I feel like that was, even when I stopped working in that specific role and for that program, I still came back and did bridge every year because it meant so much, and those students are amazing, and I still am in contact with some of them, so it feels really great.
That's cool. That is great. That's great. But then you shifted your career, right? You're in L&D or as an instructional designer. When and why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I was working as an academic support and tech specialist in the education program at my institution at this point. So I set up student field placements, did some student kind of informative training on going into the public schools, and a lot of assessment work. And the role wasn't really structured. So I was still doing the adjunct faculty career education. So going through that curriculum. And then in January, I found out I was pregnant of 2020. And right after that, COVID happened. And so we shut down. We stopped being in person in March. We moved classes online. We taught through Zoom, Google Hangout. Definitely a really interesting experience. But my master's degree is actually in distance education and e-learning, and it's not something that the institution I was at really had a venue for and really supported. And even through the pandemic, we weren't structured that way. So I was never really getting to use those skills that I learned in that program. Mm-hmm. And I had been home doing the job for a couple months, and then I was on maternity leave. And while I was on maternity leave, I just started thinking, like, I like being remote, and I like doing the student support in the way that I'm doing it from home. And then I had my daughter, and it was kind of like, why am I not using these skills that I went to school for? Like, why am I not doing the thing that I set out to do or that I wanted to do?
Right.
And so a position in the Career Center had opened up. It was an externship coordinator, and the components of it involved doing faculty training, and still setting students up. But that faculty training piece is really what kind of pushed me to start looking in instructional design. And yeah, when they made the decision to bring us all back to campus, I was like, okay, I'm giving myself an end date. I don't want to be in person anymore. It just doesn't work with what I want. I'm lucky enough that I had the ability to kind of make that call.
Yeah.
And so I started looking, and I interviewed for a few places, and the company that I'm at they really stood out. They were one of the only companies that mentioned the learner journey when I was applying, and that's what I kind of got into this for. So I accepted an offer in September of 2021. And so I'm coming up on my 1 year here as an instructional designer, and it's been really great.
Wow, that's amazing. And it is such a relevant thing that the pandemic and just the circumstances surrounding all that really accelerated the decision for us to move to a remote kind of scenario. And I never imagined that, I didn't know whether or not that would happen even in my lifetime, but, I'm, pretty much 100% remote. Absolutely. And I don't ever want to go back, and it was, and I've done it in the past before. It initially it was uncomfortable, but now I've totally got it down, I think. So, yeah, it forced us to make a decision about all of that. Now, I do want to learn more about you getting your degree in your master's in distance learning and e-learning. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when I started college, I wanted to be a social worker. I watched a lot of Judging Amy growing up, and I was like, that's what I want to do. That's how I'm going to help. And then I started talking to social workers and taking the classes, and I have a ton of respect for it, but
Yeah.
I would burn out.
Yeah.
I was a caseworker in a mental health facility for a little bit, and I did it for about a year and a half, and I was like, okay, like not
Yeah.
working for me.
Yeah.
Um, and it taught me a lot. And that's, I think, all of this transition, everything I've done has taught me something. And so I think that's why this transition has been so successful. But I went to undergrad for sociology and social sciences, and then I got to a point where I was like, well, I want a master's degree, and I'm working in education. I'm on this education track. What do I care about? And I care about making sure that people have access to education.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as an introvert, like going to school online really worked for me. And it wasn't something that a lot of my friends did or a lot of people did at the time. But I was like, I can work and I can go to school and I have to work. And then just being in kind of a traditional classroom setting made me a little anxious at the time. And I was like, I don't know that I want to go back in person for a master's program and then I can't have a job. So I was in UMGC and I was looking at their master's program offerings and I was like, distance ed and e-learning. How can I combine the two things I like, the giving access to education, the education as a whole, and in a way that makes me comfortable. And so I just started taking the classes. I know that's like not the ideal. People always are like, you got to know what you want to do because it's a lot of money. I got lucky. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and it ended up being exactly what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I started taking classes, and I just got really interested in the way distance education works and the way we learn remotely and what looks different about it than traditional education. I think sometimes when we talk about what happened with COVID, it's like, oh, well, you just throw a class on Zoom and it's good. That's distance education, and there's theories behind it. It's not, and I think what we learned as a whole is taking a class and just throwing it online doesn't work because we have to take into consideration how people learn.
Yeah.
Um, so I went through that program and I loved everything about it. And I started looking, even when I was at my old institution, I started looking for opportunities to teach online. If somebody was like, hey, you can do a winterim session, I would pitch a course. I did a talk at UMGC about building community in a kind of distance learning environment because I think that's the thing. People don't think about it. You're in person, you have a cohort, you get to meet people in your program. When you're a distance learner, I think some of the fear comes from how am I going to know people or am I going to interact? And the thing I like about distance learning is you don't have to have that experience if it's not what you're interested in. But for my master's program, I did find like a cohort of people and we did a lot of projects together. We communicated through the program. So I made those connections and I was like, well, if I can do this, then maybe other people are looking for how to do it. So I kind
Right.
of just stuck with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. So I know that this is something that people are probably wondering, but getting that master's degree, how important was that to your career, to finding a job, to moving into instructional design? Is that something you think everybody needs, or just how's it set as far as a priority is concerned?
Personally, I think my experience outside of what my master's degree was focused in was more helpful. Having a master's degree got me the jobs that provided me the experience because I think a lot of times in education, higher ed especially, it's for us it was you have to have a higher degree than the students you're teaching. So I did. I
Yeah.
wasn't teaching distance education. I was teaching career and leadership and things like that. but that degree opened that door for me to get in front of those people and to have those experiences at, like the externship coordinator position. I needed a master's degree for it, and I wouldn't have been able to do that kind of train the trainer development if I didn't have that degree. So I think in some ways, depending on like what path you're going, yeah, it could be important to open the door, but for me personally, my experience in doing these things is what got me the job, because the interviews were portfolio based, or, build something.
Okay.
I know that's not the case for everybody, but I do see a lot of people saying like, oh, you can take this course and you can take this certification and it's X amount of dollars and it's super expensive. And I think there's something to be said for professional development and upskilling and getting experience. I think it just depends on what you're looking for and how you plan on using it as you build. For me, it was a door opening. It wasn't necessarily gaining the skill.
Right. I think it's a fascinating thing right now, especially like over the last like couple years with TLDC and just sort of the topics and what we talk about overall. A lot of it, the conversation has shifted to career, because that is sort of like what is at the top of a lot of people's minds, right? Because, people are like reacting to the pandemic. They don't want to, work in the office anymore. So if they did have a job, even in L&D where they were in, where they had to work in an office, they're like, well, I want to find a remote job. So I'm just going to look for something else. And so there is all this movement that way. And I'm finding myself even, like Lisa Crockett is in the broadcast right now in the audience. And like yesterday, she had a great conversation with Susan Manos, where they actually talked about a lot of instructional design, like project management, things that were really, really practical to ID. And that conversation is happening a lot less on TLDC, I think, than it was like, say, 2 years ago. Now we're talking a lot more about career and things like DEI and accessibility, and it seems like the conversation has shifted in that direction. But you making a lot of these decisions about your career, was it mostly in reaction to the pandemic and the move to remote work? Is that primarily it? Like when you decided to get your distance learning and e-learning masters, was that before the pandemic, or was that it was before?
Yeah, so I finished in 2019. I want to say I started in 2017. I had just started at the college. I think for me, it was more about figuring out who I was and like what I was doing and where my life was going. I think the pandemic, and I've talked to my therapist about this, like full transparency, it made a lot of people think like we're at home and priorities are shifting, and the culture of work in general shifted, whether you're in person or not. And so I think the pandemic was like the final push. I had been going back and forth with what I wanted to do for a while. I'm in these positions at the college because I'm comfortable and I like students and I like getting to be adjunct and I like getting in front of a classroom in a capacity that feels comfortable for me, but I wasn't making the impact that I wanted to. I wasn't getting to kind of look at what a learner needs and build and work with people who have that, SMEs who know the content. I wasn't getting to like create, right? And so when I was home and I was sitting there thinking, and then I had my daughter, and I'm like, well, what do I want her to see me do? Do I want her to see me stay in this position and feel like I'm not growing, or do I want to, just try to do something different? And during the pandemic, I like LLC'd my business, my like part-time do it when I feel like it content creation business. And I did a couple things for some people, and I'm like, if I'm spending time doing like this website stuff and these flyers and things, like I could work on my portfolio to show that I know how to build a class. I know how to design a course that's effective. And so it kind of gave me time and it gave me a push, but it wasn't the main factor. I think me just kind of saying like, I don't want to be stagnant anymore, was the real factor.
Right. And it's, gosh, I feel like I could talk about this stuff for a while, just because it has been just almost painful, how we've reacted to all of the change and the turmoil that's been going on over the last, even pre-pandemic, right? Just some of the social stuff and everything. And that's where a lot of this activity is coming from. I think we're just reacting to all of these things that are going on around us and reassessing and all of that. But let me go back a little bit and just get to like the kinds of mistakes that maybe you made or things you would have done differently coming up in your career, or did everything end up working out okay for you? I mean, or were there things you'd go back to changing?
I think it all worked out in the end. Like, I'm
Yeah.
extremely happy now and in the end result. I think one of the things, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot. Making the shift made me really, really worried because I'm like, I haven't done this particular thing. And so I started doubting myself. And then I was like going back through everything I've ever done, written. I was thinking about, like, in my head, I was like, oh, I remember that horrible teaching experience I have. Because to be completely honest, I was teaching in person for a little bit when I was pregnant. And I apologized to all my core students that year because I was sick, I was tired, and I was not, delivering content effectively, to be honest with you. And so I started thinking about that. And it was a lot of, can I do this? Should I do this? If I do this, I'm not going to be comfortable anymore and I'm not going to be great at it walking in. So I think I got in my head a little bit and then I kind of pulled back and I wasn't giving 100% to this particular, next step. But I have a really great supervisor, multiple great supervisors who are like, you know what you're doing. The thing I like about the way I've interviewed for instructional design in comparison to the way I've interviewed for other things is everybody that I've interviewed for so far has asked me to deliver something, or better yet, have a conversation about how I would change something. And I know there's a lot of conversations about how that turns into free labor, and I 100% agree with that as well. But for me, because I was doubting myself so much, it felt good to be able to get that feedback on stuff I would put together. So I think working through some of that, I would probably go back and change and just try to be a little more confident. Additionally, I think I would stop saying yes to everything. I think that's another thing I'm guilty of. I would have downtime in my old job and just be like, yeah, I can totally do that. It sounds like something I want to do because it gets me back in front of students, or it lets me build a course or design curriculum. And instead of thinking, hey, maybe I should make that shift into doing that, I was just taking on more tasks additionally to what I was already doing. So had I could have made the shift to that job years earlier if I hadn't just said, oh yeah, well, I'm doing it because I love to do it. I'm just going to add it on and it's going to be fine. And then I'm burnout. Maybe I could have done that differently, but overall, no, I definitely think it worked out well. And where I want to be, I think I'm a much happier person in instructional design. And that's not to say that I wasn't happy in the classroom or doing those things, but what I realized is I wasn't doing it the way that worked best for me. And
Right.
We, in my old position, I had a close friend, and she was always telling students in our MAT, if you find that this isn't for you, what you don't want to do is be the teacher that gets in front of the class and gets with students and hates it. Like that's the worst, right?
Yeah.
And I think as an adjunct faculty, I was getting in front of classes, and as time was changing, I'm like, this really isn't the way I want to support students. This isn't the way I want to work in education.
Yeah.
It just wasn't for me. And I think figuring that out was like a big wake up call.
It seems that it's nice that you have a vision of what you want to do, and you're constantly shifting or tweaking sort of how your situation to make sure that it fits what you want. I think that's really, really important, and maybe not something that you're totally aware of that you're doing, but it's nice you're taking control of what the situations are that you're involved in, and that's good to hear. And I think that that's important. Are there any shortcuts? Because that's one of the things that I feel like I see a lot of conversation about, just on Reddit and other places, like in L&D groups online where people are looking for, like, I'm a teacher. How do I just want to make this change? Like, what's the, do I sign up for this boot camp for whatever, $5,000 and do it, or what should I do? But what's your response to that?
For me, and I know this won't work for everybody, but there's so much free content on the internet, and just free support. So like finding the TLDC, like there's a group of people who, if I didn't know something, I could say, hey, like I really want to learn more about this, or I'm having trouble with this. And like I can reach out to people now and just say, hey, like I've never done this. I want to learn about it. Do you have any recommendations? And yeah, that recommendation may be a boot camp. It may be a YouTube video, it may be a TikTok at this point, because that's another good venue of getting this information. I'm not going to say it's going to build a whole career off of it. I'm not done building mine, but the information is out there, and majority of the time, hopefully, we're getting to a place where it's more accessible. I watched a lot of video. Like I said, I worked in an education department, so I had faculty around me who taught instructional design, and I could go to them and say, hey, so I have a question about this. And, I was building rubrics for things. I was starting to do a lot of evaluation and assessment, and I had a data background. So even outside of like instructional design or learning development specifically, I would go to other educators and just say, like, how do you do this, or how have you done this? So it's so hard, because I don't want to say like, yeah, it's a shortcut. It depends on what works for you. But I think if you do kind of use your resources, so many people share things that are free now. And I remember like during the pandemic, there was like a spreadsheet for educators of just free resources for students so that you could work remotely, or free training that you can bring back and apply. And I love a good conference. I love a good training. So even if they're not free, if they're like $100, especially like virtually right now, I try to invest in it. I have like a Black Women in Data Summit that I'm going to attend in October that I'm super pumped about. And although it's not necessarily L&D lined up, it impacts things that I do for work.
Sure.
So I think just like kind of looking at what's out there, relying on peers. I mean, boot camps are great. I also enjoy them, but I know they can get financially pricey. And I bought a house that maybe I don't have money to.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm seeing a lot of the boot camps too are like they've sort of just popped up in response to the demand of teachers that are interested in transitioning, and so the content of them can be really questionable. I only say that because I have had people tell me like this was a terrible experience doing this or that, and so you kind of have to be careful about that. And also, Devin, you luckily, I mean, you have this experience with the bridge, right? Where you were helping these kids find guidance and through their experience in education. And so you kind of know that there are organizations or communities set up to help people and for free, to guide them. And that's pretty much what TLDC at this point can really function as. That is, you just find the right kind of people to sort of follow and learn from. And as long as, they're trustworthy and have some sense of integrity, like you, Devin, I think people should follow you on LinkedIn and sort of see what you're posting about. They know that, people can turn to you and ask you questions that are going to be important. I mean, that are going to be answered well and have some, that have some relevance to them. So that's a good thing that that. Let me see what other questions I have here. So future goals for you. What do you, now that you're working as an instructional designer, I suspect more in a corporate and enterprise sort of environment, you got any next steps that you want to take?
Yeah, I really want to bridge data and instructional design. I know they're tied, right? But so like I said, when I started in higher ed, I was an institutional research analyst. I was honestly probably the worst employee. So shout out to Anne-Marie Brady for dealing with me. But I learned so much in data, and she was amazing because she really showed me how data could be super impactful. And working for an underrepresented student program, data was financially impactful, but we were also seeing student journeys. We were seeing why we weren't retaining students. Sophomores, for example, we lost them. They were like the highest group of people who we couldn't keep. And so the program built a initiative specifically for sophomore students. And so I want to do more with data and instructional design. I want to, figure out how to take that algorithm bias and use it in a positive way.
Right.
For evaluations. And that's actually part of the reason I want to attend that summit in October. It's a big part of it. But yeah, I think if I could find a way long-term to just do something big with data and instructional design, that's where I want to go next.
Okay.
And luckily, like, I'm in a space that really does support professional development and really does kind of support those goals. So I'm excited.
There is I did do a data event, data and instructional design event for TLDC. I think it was pre-pandemic, because what had happened was I went to DevLearn live. I think it was in 2019 or 2018. It was pre-pandemic, and I was looking for people that were doing data and L&D, and only found one booth. And I'm like, okay, so I need to find more people. So I ended up putting it together an event for that. I'll put it into the chat after this is over, because I can't get into Crowdcast that way since we're in a broadcast. But that might be helpful for you. But that's great to know. If I run into anybody that specializes in that, I'll send them your way. Yeah, no, it's great that you're doing that. Yeah, and that's, I think, pretty much it. We've hit our time. And Devin, thank you so much for doing this. For folks in the audience, t2ld.com is the domain, is the URL if you want to check out our Transitioning to Learning and Development event. It's free. I mean, we've got over 100 people already registered for it. I haven't even really been pushing it yet. So it's going to be a good one, and it's a week-long event at the end of this month. Please sign up, attend if you're interested. I think you really, really enjoy it. Laura, it's T2LD. So let me type that in chat, t2ld.com. And that should take you to the actual page where you can register. And also, Laura, since you just typed in chat there, Laura was saying that she's interested in, she's an instructional designer, interested in segueing into the talent development training arena. I would like to talk to you about that, Laura, because that is an interesting segue. And I'd like to learn more about that, actually. All right. And so, Devin, thanks again for taking the time to do this. Devin is actually on the team helping build the Transitioning to Learning Development event. So, and then next week, I think it's Jennifer Naden we're going to have on. Same sort of discussion. And anybody else, if you're a teacher, became a trainer, and you want to talk about your success story or even some of your failure stories, would love to hear it here on TLDC. And with that, I'm going to shut it down. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody, for showing up today. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Bye.